didn't collect though. Um, Later on, in 1934, by the way, pollen came to Cranbrook just before the turn of the 20th century, and lived here for a number of years and then went back to England. In 1934, there's an article in the paper that Hungerford Pollen, and they called him a colorful figure in the East Kootenay, died in Surrey, England. So while he was there, he I guess he brought all his stuff back to England with him, and I'll go into that a bit later. But another article in the paper in 1946 suggests that Dr. Pollen Garrett collection went to the geology department at UBC. I haven't followed that up yet, but I don't know if it's still there and what went there. But anyway, these number of articles in the paper appeared over the years, and mostly with very inaccurate information. I'll review a couple of those in the next slide. But lately, a few YouTube clips have shown up, and mostly with erroneous or misleading information. I think Brennan Martin's is the most accurate one that I've seen. He gives good information, but there's a couple on there that I've seen that are terrible. Anyway, I won't tell you who put them on, but they are bad. Anyhow, here's Colonel Pollen, here, Lieutenant Colonel Pollen here in the lower left of the picture, and his partner, Dr. Watt, Hugh Watt. And here's the poster from 1910 or 1911. They're promoting land at three towns where the railway is going to run through: Bull River, Fort Steele, and Wausau. And they're selling lots from $75 to $250. And this dotted line is the Kootenay Central Railway. Well, they actually, CP Rail actually started building that railway in about 1909 or 1910. So they couldn't promote the railway anymore because it was a done deal, but they did promote the land sales. Now, ironically, there's a part of Cranbrook that's called Wattsville after Dr. Watt, but nothing has ever been named after Pollen. So we're not sure what happened there. So anyway, like I say, Hungerford Pollen was a colorful character, and he contributed a bit to the fossils of this area, and away we went. Anyhow, while searching the internet, I see that there's an auction at Freeman's, and Hungerford Pollen's stuff that he collected goes up for sale. And he collected a lot of Indian stuff, native crafts, beaded stuff, so on and so forth. But one of the interesting things that was sold in the collection was his little cabinet with the fossils. Now, in the bottom right, you see a nice one area, a little part of the tail is missing. And I'm not sure what this one is in here. It looks like a one area as well. A couple of other smaller trilobites in the bottom. Presumably the cabinet has other fossils in it, but all of this part of the estate sold, and it sold for $50,000. Now, had I known of this, earlier, I might have made a pitch for the museum to buy it, because it would have been quite a scoop for them. But anyway, this particular collection was taken back to England. It was in England, and his family sold it eventually last year in 2020. So anyway, some of the articles in the newspaper, just to go back to some of these erroneous and humorous things that they talked about. The 1924 article that Pollen talked about bringing back those seashells, Constable Thomas dug them out and brought them back, and they were of immense size, and of course, impossible. Now, again, one other article says, believe it or not, where Cranbrook now stands was once a bit of an ancient sea. That's okay, but geologists claim such was the case nearly 500,000 years ago. Well, he's out by 450 million years, but that's okay. Finally, there was another one. Mr. George Green was suitably impressed with the mineral cabinet near the post office, and there were some trilobite specimens there. have no idea what happened to them. Another erroneous article that showed up, 8 miles out of Cranbrook, there's gypsum deposits which produce fine impressions of leaves and footmarks said to be of seals. Well, that's kind of impossible. But anyway, this is the kind of stuff that showed up, and I'm compiling all that, and hopefully we'll publish it as a little handbook with some anecdotes with it, and will be for sale at the museum at some point. Now, Cliff White found some specimens of trilobite. Ray Mass conducted a well-attended tour of the trilobite beds, so on and so forth. Now, the last one I have, this is in 1978 or something, and there was a car accident, and the car driven by GM of Cranbrook hit the car that was turning in to the left where the old trilobite beds at the old slate. And of course, they had a crash, and that was in the paper. Now, I know who Mr. M is. He's still here. I haven't let him live that down. But anyway, it's kind of a humorous article in the paper. There's other articles in the paper not related to the trilobites, but here's one from December 6th week of 1913. And it was a dinosaur that was found in Briscoe, BC, which is just north of Invermere. Now, again, we don't know what happened to it. We really don't know what it was. We've tried to track this down. It seems unusual that there would be a dinosaur there because there's no Cretaceous or Jurassic exposures nearby to where supposedly this was found. And the only Jurassic exposure is quite high up the mountain that we're aware of, and there's nothing in it. There's no bones in it. So they found something. My best guess is that it might be a mammoth or some other Ice Age mammal that they found, and they thought it to be a dinosaur. Now, what happened to this one? I have no idea. We tried to track this down with various museums, with Tyrrell Provincial Museum, Museum of Nature in Ottawa, and so on and so forth. Nobody's heard of it. So again, one of these papers reported stuff, but never followed up. And so that's one of my projects right now, is to follow up on some of these stories and see where these are. I've located a couple fossils from that were taken out of the area that are in other museums, and that's my repatriation project, but I'm not having much luck with that either. Nobody wants to give them up. And yet, for instance, there's a nyctiosaur that was found in Morrissey in 1926, and it's at the Museum of Nature in Ottawa. I even have an accession number for it, have all the information, and it's been sitting in the box since it was found and never taken out. And I suggested they send it back to me, and we would have it prepped and displayed, and they not very warming to that prospect. Anyhow, one of the best articles in the paper was from 1960. A naturalist from Invermere was coming down here, and he was having a field trip at the fossil bed. And of course, this is the article in the paper, $100 reward for the first live trilobite. Now, it attracted a lot of attention. There was, this is the, at the old site, this is what happened after that article went in the paper. So on Sunday, 700 people, an estimated 700 people showed up. They ran out of coffee and donuts by 9 o'clock in the morning. You can see all these ladies in their Sunday best and men in white shirts and slacks, and they're just digging away there. Anyway, it's amazing that 700 people showed up, and it's no wonder the site is pretty much destroyed, but this is the kind of attention it was drawing. And again, I go back to what I suggested earlier. It wasn't attracting much attention from the researchers, but the public was sure loving it. So this is, this isn't the only occasion. We had another occasion where they had a noting out there and a lot of people showed up. Anyway, this is the site now, which you saw in the previous slide here. What you see here is the bottom of the hill here. So it's moved up a bit, but where the picture was taken at from this angle here, they were digging approximately there. Anyway, that's the site now. So we move on to the next outing they had there. And here again, this was 1978. A number of people showed up, and it was sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce and the Cranbrook Historical Society, and everybody went out there and dug. So getting to the research on the site, Schofield was the first one that actually did anything. He dug up those specimens and brought them back to the Smithsonian and named a few of them. And for a number of years, nothing happened until Rice got there in 1937, Best in 1952, and Leach in 1954. Now, Rice did a bit of work there. I can't find his original paper, but I know he did dig up some material, and Best went there in 1952 and he named the Olenellus ricei after Rice. But Best and Leach were there sent by the Geological Survey of Canada to find economic minerals, and they weren't all that interested in fossils. Although they recorded them, they never did much research on them. So it wasn't until another 40 years later that Lisa Bohatch decided to do her doctorate thesis on it, and she went there and did quite a bit of digging, and she identified some of the old sites, the other eager sites in the valley. But what happened here is that Lisa mostly did her paper on comparative anatomy of trilobites, and she used samples from various parts of North America and Europe as well. But mostly it was comparative anatomy. She wasn't really looking for new specimens or new species. But anyway, her work is interesting to read. She compares a lot of it. Of course, it's been updated a little bit since, and hers was the first in-length survey of the site. So finally, in 2015, another 25 years later or so, Caron, Gaines, Webster, and Mangano come to the site. Now, I'll just talk about these people a little bit. What happened here is they decided to have a look at the rifle range as part of their Burgess Shale study. Just to go back a bit, they came out in July of 2015. They were working on the Marble Canyon stuff at that time, and they decided to look at the specimens in the rifle range to do a bit of a comparison and a little bit of evolutionary study between the two sites. Remember, there's a 5 million year difference there between the two sites. So one of the things that Dr. Caron was interested in was the actual Anomalocaris, because it is a little bit different than the one found in the Burgess. And so he suspects there was a bit of evolutionary change there. Anyway, Dr. Jean-Bernard Caron from the Royal Ontario Museum was here. He's a Burgess Shale guy and early life specialist, soft-bodied fauna specialist. Along with him was Dr. Mark Webster from the University of Chicago. Again, he's a trilobite expert. He's a taphonomy expert and a phylogeny expert. If you know what those means, that taphonomy is the way that the fossilize or set down, and phylogeny is a family tree, and he studied those, so he's quite an expert on trilobites. One thing about Dr. Webster, he'd like to do more work here in this area because of the other eager sites that we know of, plus the fact that Dr. Chatterton may retire sometime and he'd like to take over his work. But until Dr. Chatterton lets go, Dr. Webster probably won't be here. But anyway, the other researcher was Dr. Bob Gaines from Pomona College. Again, he's John Bernard's partner and the Burgess Shales, the Marble Canyon stuff. And the final researcher was Dr. Gabriela Mangano from the University of Saskatchewan. And she's an ichnology specialist, trace fossils. And the site really impressed her. Another site we took her to, which was below the eager in on the contact with the Creston Formation, and there's a lot of trace fossils in there. We know of 2 or 3 different worm trails and some other unidentified tracks. She'd like to come back out here and spend some time on that. And that site is in Canal Flats under one of the other eager sites. So here's the rifle range site. They got a backhoe in there, took off all the overburden, and then started a trench a couple meters deep and about 10 meters long and a couple meters wide, and just started digging. And you'll see that a lot of splitting of rock was done. Now, all this overburden was pushed back in to cover the hole, and Dr. Karan would probably like to come back and continue the work. Anyway, all the volunteers, including myself, were there, and we split the rock. And of course, Dr. Webster here is identifying them or looking at them in any case. At the end of the day, we found 2,600 specimens. And of course, there's some new ones, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So here we are, just bringing up the rock and splitting away. There's Dr. Mangano looking at some incredible trilobite tracks. She was pretty impressed with those. We have that slab is about 30 centimeters across, and there's a perfect little zigzag chevron tracks from a trilobite there. Now, I might mention that all these specimens will be coming back to the Cranbrook History Center at some point when they're finished their research on it. Dr. Webster has finished his paper. It hasn't been published yet. I'm not sure when it's going to be ready, but because of COVID, there's been some delays. But that paper on this project should be ready soon. Anyway, there they are taking measurements and doing all their good stuff. Here's Joe Mosiak, and you might have run across him because he helped as well. He's with the ROM as well, and he helped with the Marble Canyon stuff. But here he is taking some measurements. And he's working on a slab, which you'll see in another picture here, this one here. On this particular slab, there is no less than 112 trilobite heads and pieces. So this was a real treasure, this one. I think there was only 2 complete ones, but the trilobite heads that are there show the 3 or 4 different species. And plus there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there. There's a Tuzoia in there and a couple of oddball things. I'll talk about later about some of the stuff that's in there. But anyway, that's a really cool piece of rock. So these are not from the collection that they found, but these are representative, and we have these at the Cranbrook Museum, and they're on display right now, without this number on them, of course. But here's the Anomalocaris claw. Now, I might mention, and I'll talk about him later, but I might mention that these were all donated to the museum by a couple of fellows that have been collecting there for years, and they probably had the best collection and the finest specimens of fossils from that rifle range of anybody that I know. Probably better than the original Smithsonian stuff that went back. But anyway, there's the Anomalocaris. I'm just showing an Anomalocaris from the Burgess shales, and if you look at the claws there, they're a little bit different than the claws here. These are more slender and not as robust as these ones. These ones are wider and have longer teeth. And so that prompted Dr. Caron to suggest that there was a change there. Here's a picture of the Anomalocaris, of course, and you're all familiar with that. And here's the one that came from the rifle range. So this is one of the better. There's actually 2 taken out of there. This is the better one, but you can see the segmentation in the claw, and the teeth are quite pronounced. So that's a really nice specimen. Here's another one of the museum collection. Here's one area from the museum collection. And here's the new one area. Now this will be named in Dr. Webster's paper. But if you look at this specimen, the tail end narrows quite a bit. Whereas the original one area Dunne specimen, the tail is more rounded. So that prompted Dr. Webster to suggest a new species. Here's the typical Anellus from the site, and it's got a piece of another one area there. That's not part of this trilobite, but the new Anellus is this one, and the spines are a little bit different. And so this one will also be named in the paper. So those are the two new specimens they found. Here's a Tuzoia we have from the museum, and we have a number of them. We actually have quite a few. Here's another Tuzoia, and this is a different species. You can see the teeth the spines are more pronounced. The ridge is more pronounced. And here's the Tuzoia paulini, which they collected this year at that expedition in 2015 from the rifle range. And this again now is a different species, but the paulini has these wider ridges on their teeth here. And this one's splayed out with the shell opened up like a butterfly. Just go to the next slide. Now, this was not found by the expedition. This was found by Wendy Morrison, and she has it in her collection. We hope to get it someday because it's the only one of its kind. The sponge that the expedition found is a little bit different. Anyway, this is a great example, and it's the only one I've ever seen and the only one that I know of in existence, actually. So it's quite a nice specimen. But they did find sponges there, and they did find hyaliths there. Now, this is a hyalith from the Burgess. The hyaliths that the rifle range are quite a bit smaller. And these are about 1 centimeter long. The ones at the rifle range are even tinier. So the trace fossils they found, this is one of the ones from the other site in Canal Flats. So I didn't have a picture of one here. They found tracks attributed to trilobites, and they're usually the narrow chevron-shaped trail. Like I said earlier, there was that exceptional one that they found. They found burrows. 3 or 4 different species were found by Dr. Mangano, and they will be described in the paper. So they look like either a raised irregular worm-like shape, or there's another type with detritus-filled burrows. And the burrows usually show pieces of trilobite or other organic material in them, and then it's filled in and preserved that way. They're a little rarer, but they do exist. And then there's mineral-filled burrows. At some point, the water chemistry changed and different minerals got in there. And we do find some that have these aluminum silicate type crystals in there. They look like mica schist, but they're not. I'm not sure what's causing that, but they congregated in the burrows. And if you find one and split one, it shimmers like mica, but it's not. Anyway, there's also burrows that are filled with manganese or iron, and you can tell those right away because they're a darker color if they're split. And it's very difficult if you split it, if you split it on where the rock fractures, you can see the raised ridges. If you split it, vertically, they're almost impossible to tell they're there. unless you have a really experienced eye. Then there's the other trace fossils that are dimples or mounds. Um, they were anchors for sponges or other fauna. The Bergaria was found, and the Bergaria was kind of like a little sea anemone and left a little dimple in the rock. And I'll show you what they sort of look like in the next slide. Now, these are from different parts of the world, but the ones that the rifle range sort of look like little dimples here that you see here. These ones here, I'm not sure where they were found, but they look like the complete animal or partial portion of the animal. You see these tentacle things there? So this is what a Bergaria looked like. They were these little critters here that anchored themselves to the seafloor, filter fed, and when they died, they had left that little excavation. Well, of course, it filled in with silt, and then when the rock is split, you get these dimple-like mounds showing up in the rock. Bergaria is actually fairly common at that site. So what happened here? They recovered 2,600 specimens. They dug 2.65 meters of stratigraphic thickness. Again, I mentioned the site is poorly known despite its occurrence of Burgess-type taxa. The study was conducted to better document the biota, the ichnology and depositional and taphonomic context, and the low diversity of fauna was analyzed. And I'm interested in finding out what Dr. Webster has to say about that. Now, given that, it was the early Cambrian, the diversity may not have been there, but obviously the soft-bodied stuff didn't fossilize, so that's missing out of there. And so what did the new research actually find? Of course, it's early Cambrian, mid-Dire, and Lagerstraat, low diversity, 5 species of trilobites now, 2 new, one of them the new Olenellus and 1 new one area. They found the hyalus, the brachiopods, Tizoia and Omlocaris. They found some cyanobacteria and a sponge. They found all the tracks and burrows, of course. And the Olenelloid phylogeny is revised. In other words, the family tree, Dr. Webster has looked at that, and he's slotted them in a different part of that family tree. So the Olenellus family of trilobites now has these new additions, and is slightly different than the old family tree that you might have been used to seeing on those graphs. And finally, the Wanaria and Olenellus show an ontogenetic series better than any other sites that they've ever dug up. What that means is that they were able to find Olenellus in one area from little babies in the larval stage right to full-grown adults, and that shows their progress in developing. And so Dr. Webster was pretty excited about that, because now he has a cross-section of Wanaria and Olenellus at all different stages of growth, and that's pretty much a new thing for them, at least one of the better documented ones for this site. So I mentioned earlier that we wouldn't have all those great fossils at the museum from the rifle range if it wasn't for the 2 Plurd brothers, Combe and Michel. And here's Combe in the pit. And this is basically just to the west of where the ROM expedition was digging. So when you see that big pit with the Royal Ontario Museum with Dr. Cron and Dr. Webster in there, it was just to the right of this. So these guys were miners. I mean, they look at the rock that they dug into and split. And that's why they were able to come up with those beautiful specimens. Anyway, we've acknowledged their contribution. They've given up their collections to the museum. And Dr. Webster has looked at them, and it's bar none the best collection he's seen of eager material anywhere in the world, and early Cambrian material in the world. It compares to some of the stuff in China, and we're quite proud to have it here in our hot little hands and on display at the museum. So with that, I'd like to end the presentation. I hope you've enjoyed this little trip through the pit there. Just so you know, we're still digging there, but it's a very difficult rock to split. And because there's so much overburden there now, you're going to have to find some fresh bedrock, which may be under 3 or 4 feet or a meter of overburden, another rock that's been split before. So it's a lot of work. And if you're up to it, come on up and give me a call and I'll take you out there and you can do the digging and I'll take the credit. Anyway, just as a reminder, we do have the fossil rules in BC. I've been in contact with Elizabeth and they want to protect that site, but nothing's happened yet. So we're still treating it as collectible until we see the order in cabinet that protects it. We're still going in there. I just might add that Chris Jenkins has collected that site for a number of years. They went back to the road cut on the highway, the new highway. Well, it's not new anymore. It was built a long time ago, but where the rock cut is, where that red rock shows up, similar to the old site, they've gone in there and they found a whole new set of brachiopods that didn't show up in the rifle range site. So he sent some of those specimens to Jean Bernard and Dr. Webster, and they're interested in them. We'll see what comes of those. So thank you very much. Thank you, Perry, for allowing me to do this presentation, and I'll answer some questions if you have any.